What is up, all you cool cats and kittens? This is your Commissioner Tim, back at it on your screen for the first official video of Season 2. Throughout the season, Commissioner Brandon will be taking over the weekly recaps with continuing the weekly Commissioner picks he's been doing since last week, continuing to hand out the Commissioner curses all throughout this league, throughout the season. And I'll continue the weekly scheduled programming with power rankings. And on certain weeks, I'll be looking to add some special add-on segments or dedicated videos outside of the power rankings as well. And you can expect that maybe around mid-season or so. And of course, given how special week one is, we'll look to add a little bit of an add-in segment on top of the power rankings for this video. And for our new managers this season, the weekly power rankings is the segment I do where I look at a bit of points for, max points for, points against, strength of schedules to date, and a few other things, especially trades or anything else like that, to sort of list out where I believe the league's current standing is when it comes to power rankings. And it's also important to note, just like last season, the list order usually sees changes quite often all throughout the top as well as the bottom and the mid, all throughout the season. So just to note, last year, the longest someone stayed number one on the power rankings was just 2 weeks. So power rankings for me in the early part of the season is really just about the playoff probability. Then as we move into the mid to late season, the power rankings will indicate more of what I view as a championship probability as the playoff picture becomes a little bit more clear. So that said, here is the first of the power rankings for our season one. We can call it the week one overreaction. So let's take a look at the standings to start out. Congrats to all the winners of week one. You are undefeated, baby. So Moncton Meerkats, Trust the Process, Brady Stir Dynasty, as well as Sergey with Mr. Ambassador starting out 1-0. With tough losses for Cup to Canada, and Bills Mafia almost had a chance to win on Monday Night Football with Full Jerry, as well as 4-Putt standing 0-1 to start out their seasons. Looking at the points for, we obviously had 3 teams that scored well above the league average. There was a big, tier jump in terms of the performance, sort of roughly in line with what we maybe expected coming into the season from the off season this year. But max points for, here was something really interesting to know. We had one performance over 200 at a near max PF, perfect pick, almost best ball numbers. But this week, we had 2 teams scoring over 200 on the max points for. And unfortunately, those 2 teams were pitted against each other, and one of those teams was going to have to start out 1-0, and one of those teams are going to have to start out at 0-1. Unfortunately for Cup to Canada, that's how his story was written. But max points for is really, really important to note in terms of power rankings, because obviously we don't play best ball. But this also just dictates maybe there are certain breakout studs in the bench that you hadn't considered, or it also shows you sort of the strength of the bench as well. So this will start to come into more effect come the bye weeks, I believe starting week 4. And you'll start to see teams that tend to have higher max points for being able to stay stronger and having a higher win percentage during the week, the bye week seasons as well. So points against, I obviously didn't necessarily need to share it in the thing, but you'll see it on the team by team breakdowns for the presentation. So let's look at the power rankings. Starting at number 8, I'm going to have to start out with Mr. 4-Putt. It's disappointing. I think 76.66 might be the worst scoring output that we've had throughout the 2 seasons now. And 76.66 points sits dead last. No one else scored under 100 points. Max points for, he also had a very favorable week, but was able to not necessarily come out with a win there. There's positives though. I think the max points four putts gets him over the 100 marker. Hopefully those wins can start to sneak out in the mid-season. But let me start off with sort of the positives for four putt. It was interesting to see Miles Sanders and the Eagle offense, the running offense. They really seemed elite in week one. It's sort of reminiscent of peak Ravens offense with a bunch of running RPOs, boosting efficiency numbers in their entire running back core. Also, it was good to see Hayden Hurst, obviously a player that Travis is really big on. It's great to see Monday Night Football. Jerry Jeudy definitely leading the targets, tied with Courtland Sutton. But it was obviously great to see the breakout sort of run that Jerry Jeudy had. I believe his first reception went for something like 60, 70-yard touchdown. I didn't know how fast Jeudy was until I saw him sort of turn up the field and score a touchdown there. I do want to mention Khalil Herbert because obviously we know that David Montgomery is likely not going to be a Chicago Bear next season. But this new sort of regime seems to trust in Khalil Herbert. He's obviously gotten more touches this season already than any of the games that they saw in his rookie season last year. And Khalil Herbert had a much better efficient number in terms of the rushing. So we may be able to see Khalil Herbert sort of start to sort of take more load on as the season progresses. Perhaps, Khalil can actually start becoming a dependable starter, a plug and play for Travis as the season progresses. I'm going to talk about the negatives. I think the Dallas offense is going to affect everyone here. But I think the negative thing that sort of, we saw here is for Travis, I just don't know what it means to Tony Pollard. Obviously, they were riding Zeke. That entire game was a little iffy. But we'll see what happens to Dak's absence if Tony Pollard is going to get more usage like it was promised in the offseason. The second negative I thought was a surprise for everyone was just how dominant of a target share Davante Adams was going to be getting in Vegas. Thought it might be different route trees that are being run by him, Davante, and Hunter Renfrow, obviously, but huge gap in terms of the types of numbers that we saw Adams getting. We can't expect him to get 40% target shares all season, but I think at this point it's safe to say that Renfrow is highly unlikely to repeat last season's type of performance as a back-end receiver one. So largely put, I think for a four putt, the question is, where are the points going to be coming from this season? Obviously, we know Travis is building for the future. So as he said in his own words, his roster is doing exactly what it's intended and designed to do. We'll see if there's any moves to pick up more draft picks, or he's able to sort of start to have some players like Khalil start to produce more points down the road. All right, number 7, I'm going to put Bills Mafia here. There was a lot of positives, right? I think the number one thing is bet the over on the 100-point plus line that we had set in the offseason heading into week 1. This team actually has an offense. The other two names that I specifically want to call out is the underperformance of Cam Akers. I mean, I think, Darrell Henderson obviously out-touched Cam Akers, I think 17-3. Akers just does not look like himself. I thought there would be a lot of volume coming his way, especially with the full off season after having come back from the Achilles tear come playoff time. But Henderson looks good. Looks like he's going to be able to produce low-end sort of RB2 or mid RB2 numbers predictably for Bills Mafia, which is huge for a player that was previously sort of counted out. Dubs, I thought, was doing really, really well. He's looks like he's going to be in line for a really good rookie season on the depleted Packers offense. And I would say he has the lead with the chemistry of Rodgers versus Christian Watson, not only because Dubs had the full off season with Rodgers, but the very first throw of Aaron Rodgers' season 2022 went long to Christian Watson, and Christian Watson just dropped it. So we know how Aaron Rodgers likes and prefer certain receivers, and I think it's going to have positive implications for Romeo Dubs. I'm not worried about Alan Lazard's return. I think also the other players that I want to list here that it wasn't listed is sort of the Rashad Bateman. He had a good fantasy output week, only had about 1.4 points before that long 55-yard touchdown reception on just 5 targets. But I think it's going to be obviously a must-play for Brandon's roster, as it looked like at least a solid wide receiver 2 for the rest of the season. And the best one for last, John Dawson. He had the best rookie receiver debut in the league fantasy-wise with 2 touchdowns for 16.5 fantasy points. And negatives, not much. I mean, we started out this season bagging on Bills Mafia. Low expectations mean there's no disappointments. And I think that was the case for Bills Mafia's season opener. Moving over to number 6, I'm going to put Full Jerry. There was quite a bit of positive here. I think the positives that I do want to mention is all the talk around Amon-Ra St. Brown not really being a true wide receiver 1, and he obviously broke out last year when the injuries to TJ Hawkinson and DeAndre Swift. So we thought maybe the volume wouldn't necessarily be there, but hey, Amon-Ra St. Brown showed up and got 12 targets, good for an elite 33% target share. And speaking of sort of some of these players, Jerry, aka John, continues to have me regret more and more of the trade I made for Zeke. In part, that was including Cam Akers, Michael Thomas, and Amon-Ra, plus a 4th round for Zeke just mid last season. And John is definitely taking the winning bargain end for that. Can't guard Mike. I mean, MT might be back in his peak form. Who knows? It's probably doubtful to expect his 2019 type of numbers, but I think it's going to be potentially a play for a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 type of output this year. And John obviously traded him away just yesterday, so that was good to see him sort of taking on that for a player that didn't necessarily fit his timeline. And obviously got Cordero Patterson back, which should negate some of the negatives that I'm about to sort of share. But staying on sort of the positives, I mean, Gabe Davis might be that guy this year. Looked really good, and obviously there's enough passing volume on that Bills offense to go around to feed Stephon Diggs to be the top end wide receiver number 1. But Gabe Davis, I think, also has a shot. I think that offense can certainly house 2 top 12 wide receivers on their roster, and Gabe Davis might just be that. Lastly, I want to mention sort of Christian Kirk, the guy who single-handedly caused a record number of rookie wide receivers to be drafted in the 1st round this year. He went off for 117 yards on 12 targets, also representing a pretty elite 29% target share. So those are a lot of the positives, but certainly there were quite a handful of negatives, some of which can be negated with the trade that he had just made. But let's sort of start off with backing sort of 2 buckets. 1, injuries to Godwin, Elijah Mitchell. The news this morning for Godwin looks like he's going to be out a few weeks. And Elijah Mitchell, I believe, is also going to be expected to miss about 6 to 8 weeks as well. So that's certainly a blow. But John definitely has all of the running backs in the Niners offense. So hopefully one of those players are going to be stepping up and taking over the duties, whether it's Jeff Wilson or whoever. The second bucket I want to mention is, the concerning starts to key players like Cam Akers and Allen Robinson, both who John had on the starter, position for week 1. It's concerning to sort of see. You got to figure Cam Akers is going to be getting more, touches and more opportunities as the season progresses. But man, 18% snap share versus 82 to Henderson. Just 3 carries total to 18 for Henderson. So, and 3 carries for 0 yards to cap it off for a donut on a very, very anticipated 3rd-year season opener for him. Allen Robinson looks like he's getting the full Robert Woods treatment from Matt Stafford. 1 reception on just 2 targets for 12 yards, with the last one that's sort of coming in garbage time with Stafford just throwing up in the air into the end zone. You got to figure Allen Robinson will bounce back a lot from this uninspiring week 1, but that's an ugly week 1 return on a player John traded last year's 109 for just weeks before the rookie draft. So It's concerning. Devonta Smith had a donut as well, and I would say he's a primary victim of the A.J. Brown debut performance in the Eagles offense there. Trey Lance also had a bad week, but I'm discounting the entire San Francisco-Chicago game just given the weather and field conditions there. So I'll reserve my thoughts on Trey Lance for him for next week or a couple weeks out. But yeah, just bad injuries all throughout. Thankfully, Najee's injury doesn't seem to be quote-unquote serious, but we'll see sort of what happens with the roster as it progresses. But I think the trade that he had made for Cordero Patterson is going to pay dividends, at least for this season. Some of those injuries to his running backs and the lack of performance to Cam Akers, I think it's going to allow him to address that RB2 position there and move up maybe David Montgomery into that sort of that flex territory. All right, moving over to number 5, got Mr. Ambassador here. Man, I gotta give a shout out to Mr. Ambassador. I thought he performed. I think the thing that really took me by surprise was the max points for. I mean, that's a very competitive max points for. Obviously, he got the win here. He was sweating bullets on Monday Night Football, thinking Rashad Penny was going to be able to score 20 points. It certainly looked like that after the first quarter, how Seattle's offense sort of started out. But going to the point on Mr. Ambassador, I thought there was a lot of positives in week 1. Jalen Hurts is going to always keep Sergey competitive week in, week out. Looks like Jalen Hurts has a chance to be a rushing leader potential this year, not even kidding. And his passing accuracy seems to have taken a step up, was noticeably better than last season. I saw him throwing some passes that he never made last year. And I think that's all helpful and possible because of the elite wide receiver in A.J. Brown helping him this season. The narrative this offseason was having people compare Josh Allen's incoming third season to Jalen Hurts' incoming third season. And this is when Josh Allen got, had taken a jump as a second-year passer, and then took that massive leap going to third year as a passer when he got Stephon Diggs to sort of help him out. So perhaps we really can expect something similar for Jalen this year. And I think Jalen finishes, for me, in the top 3 QB discussion this season. And moving it to another player, A.J. Dillon looks like the RB1A to Aaron Jones' RB1C. It's 15 touches to Aaron Jones's 8, and A.J. Dillon got all the red zone usage. So that's going to be interesting to see what happens there. And Joe Mixon was a stud. Obviously, he paid a lot for him, but Joe Mixon looks like he's going to be having a top 5 running back season this year, especially in that Bengals offense. It was crazy. He had a career high 9 targets and only was behind Jamar Chase in terms of targets. Obviously, there was a T. Higgins injury factoring in, but it was great to see Joe Mixon sort of having that opportunity. Kareem Hunt also had a day. I think 15 touches to 9. So he had 15 touches to Nick Chubb's 23. Obviously, Nick Chubb's, most of that 22 carries was how he got the 23. But Kareem Hunt had all of the red zone activity, leading him to 2 touchdowns. And I mentioned this in the bucket of the sort of the quote-unquote wrote-off stars, but I mean, some of the players that Sergey was sort of down on this season, how the offseason played out for them, in both James Robinson, but also Michael Carter, I thought both of them played incredibly well. Just talking about James Robinson, he obviously came off from an Achilles tear, so I think people were expecting the sluggish, I certainly did, of how Cam Akers sort of looked coming playoffs last season for the Rams. But man, he looked like he just hadn't missed a beat or even had an injury as severe as that. He had 12 touches for 2 touchdowns compared to just 6 for Travis Etienne. And Michael Carter, the other guy in this bucket, continues to do his part to fend off Breece Hall as he went off for 100 total yards from scrimmage with 17 total touches. And Sergey starts out the season at 1-0, having had a favorable matchup against Brandon. But I think Sergey's roster will get quite a bit stronger as we sort of go into the season, as we'll have J.K. Dobbins and George Kittle back in the coming weeks. So again, his max points for is competitive. I don't really have many negative notes on Sergey week 1 outing. The one thing to note, maybe just missed opportunity, was that the huge moment for Christian Watson did come on the very first offensive snap for the Packers, downfield, and got past secondary and just dropped a wide open tutty reception. But I think I definitely have Sergey definitely in the playoff contender tier for sure, especially after how we saw this week playing out for him. moving over to number 4, I got Brady Start Dynasty. So I've got the reigning champ starting out the power rankings at number 4, modest. Certainly a lot of positives. I got to start with Jamar Chase. He's a king. And he also would have been credited with the second touchdown. I believe that would have made him the wide receiver number 1 in terms of fantasy output had the Bengals challenged one of his receptions in the fourth quarter. Antonio Gibson also gave us his usual sort of inefficient to modest sort of rushing numbers, but the former wide receiver had his career high in targets and third best career performance in terms of receiving yards. He had 8 targets for 72 yards. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was dominating the performance in terms of not just utilization, but also the red zone usage and rushing numbers as well as passing numbers until garbage time when Isaiah Pacheco sort of came in to finish out the fourth quarter. That said, I think there was a couple other quick positives to note were the Miami receivers. I just didn't think that Miami receiving core would have the volume with Tua passing the ball, but both Tyreek and Jalen Waddle had great performances. Nothing spectacular, but I think obviously the ceiling itself has been capped to both Tyreek and Jalen Waddle by them pairing up together on that Miami's offense. But I think week 1 sort of showed that there's enough volume to go around, and those 2 receivers are going to be targeted massively on that offense for them to be able to continue to be producing low-end wide receiver number 1s for someone like Tyreek to sort of high-end to mid wide receiver 2 type of numbers for Jalen Waddle. So, and then there was a couple of negatives to note. I think in terms of performance, Tom Brady was really the only one, but that entire game against Dallas, I think was a fluke. And we know TB12 won't be having too many of those 10-point performances this season. But he did, Ryan had 2 critical injuries as well. So Keenan Allen, with the hammy, scheduled to sort of miss this week's Thursday Night Football at the minimum, and should be getting the MRI report on the severity of the hammy injury sometime in the next sort of 24 hours. T. Higgins left the game early due to a concussion, so he's obviously going to be put through a concussion protocol and likely to miss week 2 as well. I don't think it's going to impact Ryan too much, as he's going to have Jalen Waddle, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Antonio Gibson, who all sat on the bench, by the way, so he can easily plug in any of them into the flex as the injury sort of happened. And that was showcasing sort of the strength for Ryan coming into the offseason, was just how strong and how much depth he had. That he can just plug and play some of these top tier names right into the spot when injuries do happen like this. So from here, we're at number 4 obviously, but from here, at least from a way too early to call sort of predictions after week 1 performance, I feel like there is a tier potentially forming for the remaining top 3 teams, potentially making a locked 3-team race for playoffs with 3 teams competing for 4th. With 3 other teams sort of competing for the 4th and the last playoff spot. So at the 3, it was really close, but at the 3, right, because the early weeks are all about the playoff probabilities, I got to start out with the team, the only team for the remaining 3 that wasn't able to get the win to start off the season. So it's going to be Cup to Canada. But really, I think it's all about any one of these teams. If they're matched up, it'll just be a coin toss, I think, on who wins. So talking about Cup to Canada, stellar numbers. Second highest in points for, second highest in max points for. He just got unlucky getting matched up against a high scoring output for that week. So it never feels good whether it's week 1 or mid-season when you're the second highest scoring team in the league and you don't get out of that week with the win under your belt. But a lot of positives for him. I think Mahomes losing Tyreek may be the best thing to have happen for him from a career standpoint. It'll probably have some impacts to the ceiling output for Mahomes, but I think it's caused Mahomes to sort of force his targets and spread them out, or instead of forcing it downfield to Tyreek all the time, it sort of allowed him to sort of spread out his targets. The QB1 had the QB1 performance of week 1 at 34.9 points, and each receivers and flex plays are likely going to be the best all season. Cooper Kupp and Devontae Adams look like they'll continue their peak performance into the season. So obviously 15 receptions for 37% target share for Kupp. if he keeps those numbers up, he's going to repeat last year's season easily. And then 17 receptions for an astronomical 46% target share for Davante Adams. Obviously, you figure while those numbers aren't going to be continuing week to week, it definitely shows that neither of the ceilings have changed this season through the changes scenarios. Allen Robinson obviously getting added to the Rams offense, but Davante Adams moving away from Aaron Rodgers into a very receiver core studded roster with Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow for that Raiders offense. We'll see what happens, but I think both of them are going to be high-end wide receiver one categories for the rest of the season as well. So that's really good omen for what week one meant for Cup to Canada here. Travis Kelce also may continue to have his 7th straight top 2, likely top 1 finish at the tight end position for this year, and it's off to a great start, bagging 22.1 points in week 1. And all the concerns regarding Lenny coming to camp out of shape and with the Rashad White draft pick were put to rest as he just dominate the volume as RB1 for Tampa Bay with 23 total touches for 137 yards. One last player to mention, just to note, in terms of target share, was Donovan Peoples-Jones in the Browns. He led the team by a mile in terms of targets at 11. Second leading target was Amari Cooper at just 6. So if Donovan Peoples-Jones breaks out this season, he's got the athleticism to do all of this. Eve's team is definitely going to be the team to beat. Negative-wise, it's just maybe 3 players, I would say. I think Stafford's elbow may be a concern. Perhaps the entire Rams offense is paying for it by deciding not to play any of their starters in the preseason this year. But I think, just 3 interceptions and a fumble to boot, that's concerning for Eve's team, who worked all season last season to remedy his QB2 position. But question marks to Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara. I think both of them looked a little step slow from their peaks. I've never seen Derrick Henry ever trucked by a defender in my life, yet we saw it in week 1. But that said, Derrick Henry should always get stronger, and as the season sort of progresses, as the defenders sort of tire out, as he does get stronger even in the games themselves. But if Henry and Kamara are not able to finish in mid to late, even RB1 tiers this season, Eve might lack the top end ceiling to win it all. One last small note was the Dameon Pierce hype train sort of running off the tracks in week 1. I mean, who had Rex Burkhead getting 19 touches on their bingo card for week 1? I think Dameon was slightly better efficiency, numbers-wise than Burkhead in rushing. So there's still a chance that Dameon will work himself into at least an early down workhorse for the Texans as the season continues. But I was surprised to see just 29% snap share for him in week 1, especially after the Texans cut Marlon Mack. All right, moving over to number 2, Moncton Meerkats. Ton of positives here. Obviously, his numbers from points for max point 4 is not as high as Eve, but starting 1-0, you're always going to have a higher probability to making the playoffs, and that's what the early season power rankings are all about. So starting off the positives, man, Saquon, he's back. And he was the entire Giants offense for week 1, 33% target share. So the number 1 receiver for the team with 7 targets, and then also was able to get 18 carries for 164 yards. Boy looked fast and explosive too. So 30.4 points for an overall RB1 in week 1, and he just looked great. And I hope he stays healthy and just crushes this season, because a healthy Saquon is enjoyable for every NFL fan. I do want to highlight a couple other players, but one in detail before some quick mentions, and that's got to be Michael Pittman. Obviously, the undisputed wide receiver 1 for the Indianapolis Colts. But with Matt Ryan at the helm, it looks like it's going to raise Pittman's ceiling and level him up another level from the breakout season we saw last season in him. Matt Ryan threw for over 350 yards in week 1, with 121 of that going to Michael Pittman. The Colts only had 2 games over 300 passing yards all last season with Wentz at the helm. So week 1 may be a sign of some amazing things ahead for Michael Pittman this season. Now, in terms of the quick hits names I want to mention are Stephon Diggs. Obviously, it's going to continue to be a QB1, wide receiver one there. But Jarvis Landry, who led the Saints in terms of targets and yardage with 9 targets and 114 yards. Who knows? But he's obviously talented, and we'll see what happens this year. But that was a great week 1 performance. And then Curtis Samuel, who I believe Moncton Meerkats picked up on the waiver in the offseason, maybe about a couple weeks before the season started, led the Commanders with 11 targets and got himself a tutty too. So it looks like the Commanders may utilize him in a unique way this season, as they got him 4 carries as well. So some negatives. I'll start a note on Austin Eckler, who looks like he's lost a step too. And obviously, when you get to 27, 28 in running back years, even for someone that's got low tread on their tires like an Austin Eckler, it is concerning to sort of see. 14 carries for 36 yards, while Joshua Kelly was able to get 21 yards on just 4 carries. So the efficiency numbers are concerning for sure. His receptions are obviously going to keep him in the relevant sort of RB1 discussion, maybe on the back end of RB1. But it's hard to see him repeating the type of performance we saw from him last season. So that said, the big negative here is really the injury to Dak Prescott. He will be undergoing surgery. Looks like he completed yesterday, and looks like he's going to be out at least 6 to 8 weeks. So they're considering bringing him a week before the bye or the game after the bye. Around week 7, I believe, is when Dallas Cowboys sort of have their bye week. So that said, Tannehill and Matt Ryan, who Moncton Meerkats has on the bench, are going to be serviceable QB2s in the meantime. So that's a big loss for a team who's got championship aspirations for sure. I'm talking about Kyle's team. So keep your eye on your inbox for trade discussions for your QBs from Kyle in the coming days if you haven't already gotten them like I have. All right, and that moves over to the top of the power rankings for week 1. Trust the process. I feel awkward putting my team at number 1 spot, not because I've never come close to this, not only because I've never come close to this, sniffing this spot last year all season, but because I generally just feel awkward putting myself at number 1 on anything. Alas, higher scoring team, also starting out the season at 1-0. I think this is the only place to really put myself after week 1. Just keep in mind, I'll probably be discounting my own calculations for future lists in terms of where I rank. That said, obviously, a lot of positives from week 1 for me, but a lot of notable negatives that I'm genuinely concerned about too. So starting off the positives, the marquee offseason pickups in Justin Jefferson, Josh Allen, that was great. I mean, they combined for over 66 points for me, just those 2 players alone in their trusted process team debuts, finishing as a wide receiver 1 and QB2. And with the continued workhorse usage in Jonathan Taylor, that was great to see. I mean, 31 carries. We're not going to see that often, but that was great to see. And then maybe this year is finally the year that DeAndre Swift is able to finally break out. So in week 1, between Justin Jefferson, Josh Allen, Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, that gave me 4 players in the fantasy top 10 performance in the entire league. Those 4 players combined for 116.98 points in week 1, just those 4. And to cap it off, A.J. Brown may be able to have a breakout season this year, becoming a true wide receiver 1 this year, especially if Jalen Hurts continues to target his buddy. That relationship is obviously a good start, as AJB got over 40% target share from Jalen Hurts. But I do want to talk about sort of the negatives that I'm genuinely concerned about. Obviously, the Dallas offense looked like a disaster on Sunday Night Football. It's hard to see that getting better now with Dak out for the first future. And even though CeeDee Lamb had 11 targets, he only got 2 receptions, as he barely got any coverage because the defense was just all on covering for CeeDee. They got no other offense. Plus, that offensive line looked pretty atrocious, so on pass pro at least, so giving Dak really no time to throw. So at this point, CeeDee Lamb may not even be a competitive flex play until Dak returns and Dallas fixes their offense. Kyle Pitts was a victim of Atlanta's poor offense. Mariota is who he is at this point, and it will be rare to see him passing for over 250 yards this season. Defenses will continue to scheme for Kyle Pitts, it looks like. And while I wasn't really expecting for Kyle Pitts to have a step up this year in terms of fantasy stats, it looks like it'll be another year that we just got to wait on for Atlanta's offense to get a new franchise quarterback sometime next season. But lastly, I do want to mention Travis Etienne, because James Robinson did not look like he came back from a torn Achilles. I was expecting the type of sluggish performance like I mentioned. But in one of the first carries back from the injury, he ripped off a 22-yard rush and ended up out touching Etienne 13-6. Obviously, it didn't help that Etienne himself had a fumble, not really necessarily helping his cause. But that's going to be something I have to look at in the foreseeable sort of future, see what's going on with the snap shares there. Ultimately, I still think I'm obviously in the firm playoff discussion this year, but I definitely have question marks looming on my roster that will make it hard to break out into my own tier, and that was really the goal heading with all these offseason trades. So this roster should get stronger as the season progresses, given the youth that I have on my bench, similar to, by the way, how I see Brandon's roster. But unless CeeDee Lamb, Kyle Pitts, and Travis Etienne are able to perform at at least at their ADPs and redraft formats this year, I think this will limit my roster's ceiling week in, week out. So that's it for my roster and the first power ranking of season 2 of Cool Cats and Kittens. Here is sort of the overall list. And after week 1, I've currently got the playoff cutoff number at 7-7 for the season, but I do have the top 3 teams, whoever they end up becoming. I think the top 3 teams will all finish over 9-5 records this season. So that 4th place, I think, is going to be up for grabs if week 1 is any indication. Obviously, small sample size institute says you might not necessarily take too much grain of salt with it, but good luck for the rest of the season. Excited to chat with you guys and see you guys on Thursday, Sunday, and Monday. Good luck, boys.